We Japanese still. You getting cooked in front of your family? Like a Japanese meal. It's Yashub the hibachi and none of you niggas can stop me. But can't help but watch me. So look, bro. I had to address this topic. And, I was conceptualizing how I was going to do this. And I was like, okay, the best way I can tackle the 12 tribes chart, because I know nobody's going to debate it. They're afraid to debate me on this because they know that you can't pigeonhole me to your interpretation. You can't pigeonhole me to your doctrine that you got from some guy in New York. The Black Hebrew Israelites spawned out of Abba Bivens, those pseudos. You can't get me with that, so you're not going to debate me. So I'm like, okay, what's the best way for me to destroy and refute? Because this is a refutation. This is not a rebuttal. This is not, the video doesn't say debunk. The title doesn't say debunk. This is a refutation, which I've touched on before at times past. And how we're going to deal with this is just to deal with the theme that the 12 tribes chart sets. The theme that, the 12 tribe chart and the people that believe in it, the theme that centers it is the theme of Blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, all descending from a man named Jacob. If you understand anything about DNA, if you understand anything about genetic inheritance, then you know how to trace male ancestry. And the way you do it is through the Y chromosome. All males carry a Y chromosome. They pass it down to their sons. So to test the idea of the 12 tribes chart claiming that all Blacks, all Hispanics, and all Native Americans indeed descend from a man named Jacob, then they shall share the same Y chromosome markers. And that's what we're about to examine today. We're going to deal with the Dominicans because according to popular discourse amongst Black Hebrew Israelites that support the 12 tribes chart, they believe that Dominicans are the tribe of Simeon, which will be a man that would form that tribe in the Bronze Age or Middle Bronze Age, somewhere around that area, going towards late Bronze Age. So they shall all share the same Y chromosome. It's an easy way to test this hypothesis. It's an easy way to test this doctrine. It's just going to the people that they're claiming that are Simeon, that they are claiming that share paternal ancestry, and checking the Y chromosome of these groups. Now, these people have been radicalized. A lot of these Israelites have been radicalized. I was a part of IUIC. I should know because I was actually with that camp, and you can just see the camp's ideology in real time. Go to their channels. You can watch them yelling at random white people on the street. You can listen to them condemn people. You can listen to them on YouTube right now teaching their doctrine. And as you can see, like a lot of it doesn't make sense. And the irony behind this, when you look at you examine the 12 tribes chart, the irony is all of the tribes consist of European men descendants, European male descendants, all of them. That's on the chart. Why is that ironic? Why is that an oxymoron? It's because they spend majority of their time castigating and talking down on the European men and women of the Americas, condemning them to slavery, condemning them, saying that they are liars from birth, saying that the Most High is going to send Christ back to destroy and kill them and bound them in chains and subjugate them and decimate them. All these heinous things that are spewing out their mouth. And that's why I find it funny when someone tries to criticize my channel. Oh, you curse. Okay, well, big whoop. Listen to what these guys do. Listen to what these guys do. Open racist, anti-Semitic peoples. That's what they are. So we're going to take our time, and we're going to break down who are the Dominicans. And, eventually it's going to be a 12-part series or more, breaking out each individual tribal claim. And we're going to test these tribal claims with the DNA, because remember, the doctrine is easily testable. All we have to do is test it against the Y chromosome of the people they claim are all sons of Jacob. Remember, in order to be a direct descendant of a male, you will share the Y chromosome of that male. Okay? This is very simple. So let's get right into it. Before we get into it, I would like to share the 12 tribes chart so that no one's confused and just showing that I'm not misrepresenting what these guys claim. 12 tribes of Israel. They say Judah, American blacks, Benjamin, West Indian blacks. Now, you might go throughout the internet and find different variations and different claims of this chart. I'm going to use the Israel United in Christ chart. That's the one that I was privy to when I was a Black Hebrew Israelite and I was a part of the cult. So this is what I'm going to be dealing with primarily. I know GOCC believes that Southeast Asians are like Reuben or something like that. So that's a different claim, and maybe we will do an entire breakdown on those claims as well and test those claims with the empirical data and the evidence that we find within these groups. So Judah, the American blacks, that's an issue. How can all American blacks or a great majority of American blacks descend from one man named Judah if they have a variety, a multiplicity of haplogroups amongst them, meaning they descend from several different male groups, not just one. Same thing with Benjamin, West Indian blacks, same things applies, just because they're categorized as black. And this is the irony of, One West and Israel United in Christ and BHIs in general. They don't understand that they claim to be moving away from the social construct known as race, but actually you're galvanizing that concept because you're saying the same thing by saying, well, all these American blacks belong to this one group or this one person. And this was the idea that, the race scientists of the past believed in, that if you fit in one of these racial categories, then you descend from the same or similar ancestors. Levi, the Haitians, this is just complete bananas. Doesn't make any sense either. Sakari, Vanilla Hebrew, that is the leader of Sakari. He claims to be a Levite because he claims Haitian heritage. But ironically, he found out that his father was haplogroup R, which would mean actually the Levites would have to be Western European if we're going to follow his logic. Ephraim, Puerto Ricans. We're going to break this down eventually. Manasseh, the Cubans. Simeon, Dominicans. Highly Eurasian groups here. Zebulon, Guatemala, the Panama. They have here in brackets the Mayans, which would be ancient native indigenous peoples, which have a mainly Q, haplogroup Q. And they have their own specific branch of haplogroup Q that separates them from like Siberians with haplogroup Q. So they're their own unique group here. You do have a large indigenous genetic input in Central America. It seems that it has been like a incubator or repository, if you will, of native indigenous male ancestry in comparison to like the Caribbeans, where it barely exists. But like in Mexico, I think like 30% of the paternal lineages actually do stem back to indigenous people. Gad, Native American Indians. Again, this is another oxymoron because many people that call themselves Indians today, highly European. You got an African component and a very small indigenous component. Reuben, Seminole Indians. Again, the African component, which is a mixed bag in itself, and European component, and a small percentage of native indigenous component. Asher, Colombia to Uruguay, Incas, South America. There's pockets where you have, native indigenous representation. Again, will most likely be the Q markers, right? Which is completely different than what Western Central Africans have. It's a completely different genetic profile. But you have a high Eurasian input there. In South America, Issachar, the Mexicans, Aztecs, and Naphtali, Argentina, and Chile. And Argentina, you don't get no more European than Argentina, I tell you that. So once we get to Argentina, we're gonna do justice on that. And then They include everybody else by saying Isaiah 11:11 scattered throughout Africa and abroad. So for everybody get familiar with this 12 tribes chart, if you're not, but this is something the Israel United Christ, Sakari, GOCC, no, excuse me, GMS, and other camps utilized to buttress their claims that the blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans all descended from one man. Anyway, so with that being stated, let's go to the Israel United Christ website real quick. Again, so because oh, you mischaracterized them. No, again, they have the 12 tribes chart here. It's pretty much the same today, up to date as it was when I was there. Again, Simeon is said to be the Dominicans, and I'll just read this real quick here. This is on their web page. It says the tribe of Simeon was among the 10 tribes of Israel when they migrated to Arsareth. That's another thing they believe in the account in Ezra about migrating to Arsareth. They believe that equates to the Americas. Again, I was indoctrinated with this. I taught this. There's videos of me echoing these sentiments years ago. Again, this is all mythos. This doesn't make any damn sense. And we can't back it up with empirical data. That's the problem. That's the issue you're going to see with a lot of these doctrines that Black Hebrew Israelites regurgitate on the internet. It's just hard to rationalize with the data. It just not harmonized well. So they're claiming Arsareth is the Americas, and it'll tell you to read 2nd Ezra 13:40-44. And it says they inhabited the island of Hispaniola, which we shall prove and were conquered by Spain in 1492. In the 1600s, the tribe of Levi, it has in brackets Haitians, along with Judah and Benjamin, were sold into captivity by Africans and Arabs to the white man. The white man then transported them in chains on slave ships to Haiti to serve hard bondage as slaves. So this is the claim, and then they claim that the Brujeria, the voodoo, and all that is of the prophecy in Genesis 49. And this is how they can point and pinpoint who's who according to them, which we're about to see. This is all hogwash. None of this stuff can be, again, validated and cemented with data, with the DNA of the people themselves. None of it at all. But these are the claims that these guys teach. And you may have ran into some of these people on the street or ran into their YouTube lives where they regurgitate this propaganda. So you know how we do. We like to go straight to the papers, man. So you can see the claim. Let's test the claim against the evidence. This is the up-to-date scientific data. Right? So when you test the people of Hispaniola, you test the people of the Dominican Republic, you will see that these people are firstly, let's just say this, heterogeneous. They are not homogeneous. They are heterogeneous. These people are different. They have different male ancestries. So that right there tells you that they all cannot be descendants of Jacob. That rules that out. Now, we don't have to get too deep or philosophical on that. It's just that little simple fact alone just kills the 12 tribes chart. It just puts a knife in it. It just ends it right away. And this is why they want to just have interpretation fights and argue all day about how they feel the Bible should be interpreted. They don't want to have arguments on the data because the data does not agree with what they are teaching. Okay? This is not the 90s. This is not the 80s. We don't have crude methods of explaining ancestry anymore. We have the field of genomics. We understand how DNA works now. We understand that we are not homogeneous groups. We are mixed bags. We are a hodgepodge of people, not the same. So when you examine the Dominicans, what do we find? This from the paper, Why Haplogroup Diversity of the Dominican Republic, Reconstructing the Effect of European Colonization in the Transatlantic Slave Trades. D'Atanasio et al. This is published in 2020. So pretty up-to-date stuff here. And again, European colonization and the transatlantic slave trade. So that's already hinting at the genetic matrix of these people, right? You're not going to find a single lineage where they all go back to. That's not what you're going to see here. And we're going to read the abstract. And if you guys have been following, the abstract denotes the summation of the paper. The Dominican Republic is one of the 2 countries on the Hispaniola Island, which is part of the Antilles. Hispaniola was affected by the European colonization and massive deportation of African slaves since the 16th century, and these events heavily shaped the genetic composition of the present-day population. To shed a light about the effect of the European rules, we analyzed 92 single SNPs on the Y-chromosome in 182 Dominican individuals from 3 different locations. The Dominican Y haplogroup composition was characterized by the ancestors of Northern African and European lineages at 59%. So as we can see, 59% of the Y chromosomes are either categorized as Northern African or European, following by the African clades is 38%, whereas the Native American lineages were rare at 3%. So what is this telling us? First of all, this denotes that they're heterogeneous. They're not homogeneous at all. These people have 3 separate major components, and then they break into their own smaller components, as they're calling North African European. Many of those European lineages come in, which is, as you can see, that's the highest number. That is actually the predominant lineage of the Dominicans is actually European or North African. And the reason why is because of a sex bias. Many of these men were coming over here in groups, and they were having sex with the local women or the African women that they were bringing over during the slave trade. That's what that's showing. The people there today are a genetic footprint of what happened during the colonial period. As you can see, only 38% of the African clades. Now that relatively that's high in comparison to like America. Like North America is only like 8% African. As far as the male lineages go, they're only like 8% paternally. And such whereas the Native American lineages were rare at like 3%. So remember, the IUIC and other Israelite camps, they claim that many of these people represent the indigenous groups because they believe the indigenous groups themselves descend from a man named Jacob that lived in the Middle Bronze Age. But as we can see, only 3% of those native indigenous lineages exist in the DR. So, which is it? And then it will claim that the Africans that are there are somehow related to these indigenous lineages that were there prior to, which is just another bizarre belief. It says here the comparison with the mitochondrial DNA variability dominated by African clades revealed a sex bias admixture pattern in line with colonial society dominated by European men. This is why this number right here is so high, 59%. Many of these people that they're naming Dominican are naming Simeon, according to their chart, are actually European men, which presents a paradox. It's very paradoxical because they go out in the street and they condemn the European population and call them Esau and say that they are Satan and, all these pejorative terms. Very ironic when you have a 12 tribes chart and many of your members themselves are the children of Europeans. But be that as it may, it says when other Caribbean and non-Caribbean former colonies were also considered, we noted a difference between territories under a Spanish rule, like the Dominican Republic, and British/French rule, with the former characterized by an excess of European wild lineages reflecting the more permissive Iberian legislation about mixed people in slavery. Finally, we analyze the distribution in Africa of the Dominican lineages with a putative African origin, mainly focusing on Central and Western Africa, which were the main sources of African slaves. We found that most 83% of African lineages observed in Santo Domingo have a Central African ancestry, suggesting that most of the slaves were deported from those regions. So again, we have African component, Native Indigenous component, and a major component there are European. So, a lot of these Israelites out there that are, propagating the 12 tribes chart, you're propagating a chart of Europeans. because the the lion's share of males throughout the whole chart. If you want to start with Judah, you're saying the African Americans. Well, they have a 35% paternal European component. If you want to go to Brazil, it's even higher, 75%. So if you just even the people that are classified, wait till we get to the Brazil paper. I'm going to deal with each claim separately. So this is, presumably going to be 12 videos. But when we get to Brazil, even the people that call themselves and classify themselves as Black are highly Eurasian and highly European, right? So it's irony, and it's also poetic justice, because you spend all these years on the street yelling at white people, random white people they don't even know, claiming that they're all these foul things and that they are the devil that the Bible speaks of. Those are their words. Just to come to find out that you are one of those children, and you propagate a 12 tribes chart that's full of those children. So, it's irony. And again, like I said, it's poetic justice. It's poetic justice. It says here, let's go now. It says here, despite the importance of the Dominican Republic in the colonial history of the Caribbeans, little is known about its Y haplogroup composition. Analyzing the formula Y markers in Dominican individuals and comparing them with European and African samples, we observe a majority of Central African Y lineages and Dominican sub-Saharan component, suggesting that most of the deported African slaves came from Central Africa. We also found a disproportion of European paternal lineages compared with the maternal ones because of sex-biased admixture due to the social dominant role of European men. Finally, comparing our results with data from the Greater Antilles, we also observed differences between islands in the paternal ancestry proportion, possibly related to the regulations about mixed unions adopted by the colonists. Again, the dominant component is of European men. A lot of Dominicans today descend from Europeans. There's no way around this. Even some of them descend from Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews, because the island history had Sephardic Jewish input there as well. A lot of these groups you guys hate on, and you speak so much venom about, are actually on this chart. Unbeknownst to you, that you actually included them in your 12 tribes chart. And again, all of this information just invalidates the central claim of the chart. The main claim of the chart is that all 12 of these tribes that are, the Dominicans, the Puerto Ricans, the the Northern Indians, the Seminole Indians, the Brazilians, all of these groups, African Americans, all of these damn groups have different male ancestors, meaning they all can't be from Jacob, which invalidates the entire chart. And it validates the entire chart. All right. Introduction. The Antilles is a group of islands forming an arch between the Florida Peninsula and coast of Venezuela. It is bordered by the Caribbean Sea to the west and south, the Gulf of Mexico to the northwest, in the Atlantic Ocean to the east and north. The archipelago is usually divided in Lesser Antilles to the southeast and Greater Antilles to the northwest, compared to the large islands of Cuba, Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, Jamaica, and the Cayman Islands. According to archaeological evidence, the first human settlements by Native American people in the Greater Antilles date back to 8,000, 5,000 years ago. So again, none of these data points work well with the 12 tribes chart, because they also believe that the Native Americans didn't get over here until the Assyrian conquest. And the Assyrian conquest happens around the 8th century BCE. The issue with that, there were already human settlements here 8,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, long before there was any group known as the Assyrians, long before the Assyrian conquest, long before the formation and formulation of the Israelites. So again, when nothing actually helps this chart, nothing actually helps, most of Black Hebrew Israelite doctrine. This is not just a chart. Like, most of Hebrew Israelite doctrine withers around the edges when tested with the available evidence. It withers around the edges. So, it just shows the origins of it. It didn't come from a think group. This literally came from black African power groups, that was trying to adopt an Israelite way. That's the best way I could put it. Like your Abba Bivens and so on and so forth. And that's the pseudo origins of this thing. And then it evolves and blossoms into what we know today, where some sects believe in a 12 tribes chart. Even the sects that don't believe in the 12 tribes chart, they still run into this problem. And the problem is they don't understand diversity within groups, within racial groups or national groups, right? Or ethno-linguistic groups. They don't understand diversity. So again, they will see Puerto Rican and think Puerto Rican is a uniform, homogenous group, and it's not. Because they try to assign Puerto Rican to Ephraim. That's one man, that's one male lineage, that's homogeny, right? They're heterogeneous. They're heterogeneous. They're not all the same. They're diverse. And that's what they fail. And even the people that don't support the 12 tribes chart, they will do this and broad brush all black African people. They will broad brush all African Americans. And they will tell you and lead you to believe that majority of them are somehow descendants of Jacob or somehow Israelite. That is impossible. That is impossible. They are diverse groups of people. They all can't be Jacob. They all can't be one thing, essentially. Anywho, it says between 5,000 and 2,000 years ago, other migration waves from the American continent arrived in this group of islands, probably from the Orinoco River Basin and through the Lesser Antilles. These human groups were probably the ancestors of Taínos, the people inhabiting the Greater Antilles when the European colonists arrived in the 15th century. And how do we know this? Because we have ancient DNA from some of these regions, and they compare with the indigenous groups today. That's how we know. They dug up the ground, they dug up the skeletal remains from the ground, took the specimens, exhumed the bodies, checked the DNA, checked the Y chromosomes, and compared it to modern people, right? And as we've seen earlier, about 3% of those Dominican Republicans actually retain that ancient Caribbean male ancestry. It says here the exact population size of Taínos at the arrival of the European colonists is hard to estimate. Numbers ranging from 100,000 to 1 million have been proposed, although recent study based on ancient DNA led to an estimation of 10,000 to 20,000 individuals. The contact with the Europeans led to a rapid collapse of Taino population due to the three main concurrent reasons: epidemic of infectious diseases from the old world, and again, like smallpox and stuff like that. The Europeans were bringing in diseases that the native indigenous people immune system were not used to. Africans, we had a little, we had more of a fighting chance because our immune systems were sort of used to the Eurasian input or the Eurasian DNA. So we were able to fight that stuff off. It says wars against colonists or other Caribbean population and enslavement by Europeans. Despite the dramatic impact of the European colonization on the Taínos, footprints of their genetic legacy can still be recognized in modern Caribbean populations. Again, as we read in the abstract, 3% of the males in the sample size are indigenous Indians paternally. It says here the Taínos were exploited to work in the plantations of cotton, coffee, tobacco, and sugarcane at the base of the economy of the European colonies. With the collapse of the native population, the introduction of African slaves to the colonies sharply increased. And I have to note this for the audience here, because what happens with these groups, with these pseudo groups, these Black Hebrew Israelite groups, these Israel United Christ, ISUPK, One West, and everybody else, they will use shared experience to try to claim shared ancestry. So they will say, oh, well, Taínos were the first people enslaved. They were sold on slave ships. So therefore, first of all, let me give a disclaimer. Experiences at all, period, do not tell you who's who. You can come up with your interpretation, Deuteronomy 28:68 all day. That does not determine who's who on the planet Earth, what ancestry that you have. Do you and I share the same common ancestry? Just because we go through a shared common theme or shared common experience does not mean you and I share the same bloodline relatives. That just doesn't work. That's bunk. It doesn't work. We have a field that deals with ancestry. That is the field of genomics. Not your pastor or your preacher or your imam on the street yelling at people telling them Deuteronomy 28:68. So as you can see, the Tainos, they were oppressed, they were enslaved, they did work on plantations like many Africans did, right? And many Europeans did as well. So it doesn't make any sense. This common ancestry argument, a lot of the serfs served, a lot of the white European Jews served in slavery. I mean, we can go on and on and on about how many people groups dealt or were sold on slave ships and were sold into slavery and had to serve in slavery. We can do that all day long. Common experience does not denote common ancestry. They're not equivalent. These Tainos went through a similar experience as Africans. That does not mean themselves are the same as Africans. They themselves. I mean, this is just simple stuff, but you'll be confused by these witch doctors, and these Black Hebrew Israelite cults that are trying so desperately hard to indoctrinate you guys instead of educate you guys. And that's the problem. That's the underlying issue we're having here. So again, Tainos did work on plantations of cotton, coffee, and tobacco and sugar cane, and then eventually they were replaced by African slaves. It says nowadays, because of its history of migration and colonization, the population of the Antilles is a mixture of people from Europe, America, and Africa. See, these are three different, three different continents with their own genetic diversity involved in it. So that just makes the 12 tribes chart collapse and wither around the edges. Because if you're saying the Dominicans are Simeon, you're saying Europeans, Americans, and Africans, and all those groups involved are Simeon as well, which doesn't make any damn sense. It says, similarly to other American peoples, genetic data from autosomes reveal that the proportion of European, American, and African ancestry greatly varies among different American regions, with the Antilles showing a higher degree of African ancestry compared with other American groups because of the massive deportation of African slaves by European colonists. So like places like Jamaica, Trinidad, Tobago, they have higher, on average, African input, especially like paternal input, than North America. It says here, the analysis of the uniparental markers of the human genomes, that is the mitochondrial DNA transmitted along the maternal lineage and male-specific region of the Y-chromosome with a paternal inheritance, reveal different patterns reflecting the political organization of the European colonies in the Americas that were ruled by European men with dominant social role. In general, maternal lineages show a high proportion of Native American, 30 to 60%. So 30 to 60% of the females there are indigenous females, and many African Americans and many Dominican males and Dominicans in general will retain this Native indigenous maternal lineage. Or African, 20 to 40% haplogroup. So majority of it is either Native Indian or African, where the European lineages are less frequent, approximately 10%. And this is easily explainable because, most of the time in history, most of these travels are androcentric. It's mostly male. So when Columbus came over here, Hernan Cortez came over here, that was mostly males. They were not importing European women. It was primarily males coming over here. So they get over here and they begin to mix with the indigenous component, which are the locals, and the slaves that they were bringing over here. It says on the paternal side, most of the Y haplogroups are of European origin, less than 70%, or of African origin, which is 20%. Whereas the Native American lineages are very rare or absent. Why is that? Because the Native American males, many of them were dying off, either diving for pearls or dying, in the plantation, dying from the diseases. And most of them were just eliminated during this time. It says here, among the African Y lineages, the most frequent is E1B1A, M2, followed by haplogroup B, consistent with the Y haplogroup distribution in Western and Central Africa, where most of the African slaves came from. And the Greater Antilles, Hispaniola is the second largest island on the archipelago. It represents an interesting case being divided into two political entities, Haiti to the west, and Dominican Republic to the east. Remember, these guys claim that Haiti is somehow Levi and Simeon are Dominicans because they saw a scripture that says Simeon and Levi are brothers. So they're on the same island. That's what that means. It's funny how the mind works. They do all this recharacterizing the scripture and flipping and twisting the scripture to try to, be this black power / Indian Hispano movement. Doesn't make any damn sense, right? And all these groups do it, even the ones that don't even push the 12 tribes chart. Even outside of the Israelite spectrum, Afrocentrics in general do this, where they try to mold and bend history to fit their racist view of the world and how ancestry should work. All of these groups are guilty of this. It says here the first European colonies in the Antilles were established in the Dominican part of this island that was ruled by Spanish until 1697, when Haiti passed under the French rule. After this point, the histories of the two halves of Hispaniola partly diverged, and the present-day Dominican Republic was characterized by economic decline and political instability due to frequent pirate raids, in contrast with French colonists who eventually managed to take the control of some Dominican regions. The first decade of the 18th century was characterized by struggle due to unstable French rule until the Spanish colonists reestablished their power. In the meantime, a violent revolution broke up in Haiti in 1791, eventually leading to the independence of the former French colony. After another decade of disorders, the Dominican part of Hispaniola was declared independent in 1821, but it passed under the Haitian control shortly after, briefly reuniting the Hispaniola island under the same rule until the Dominican War of Independence in 1844. We all know about Haiti gaining its own independence. It says here, on the genetic side, the two-country Hispaniola island shows differences in maternal and paternal genetic composition. What we read over here is pretty much the composition of the Caribbeans as a whole. Again, less than 70% European and almost approximately 20% African, and the native composition being very rare there. Down here, it says, possibly due to the different history, considering mtDNA diversity, the Dominican Republic shows up to 22% of Native American lineages, whereas they are virtually absent from Haiti. So Haitians do not show maternal Native American lineages, meaning they don't have that many female Native American or ancient Native American lineages amongst them. So considering the Y lineages too, Haiti and the Dominican Republic seem to show slightly different pattern, but a detailed description of Y haplogroup composition of the Dominican population is still lacking. Nonetheless, the analysis of the Dominican chromosome's variability is of crucial importance to fully understand the effect of European colonization and transatlantic slave trade on the genetic diversity of the Antilles, considering the important role of Hispaniola in the colonial Caribbeans and its peculiar history. To fill this gap in our knowledge, we analyzed 92 Y SNPs and 182 Dominican individuals from 3 different locations of the Dominican Republic. We observed a proportion of European, African, and Native American Y haplogroups in line with the other populations from the Antilles, although some differences are present. To assess the Western African or Central African ancestry to Dominican samples with a supposedly African Y haplogroup, we then focus on the ethnic and geographic distribution of these clades by analyzing Y SNPs in a wider set of approximately 5,000 males from the lab collection, extracting the data from the relevant populations of the phase 3 of the 1,000 Genomes Project. So basically, they're comparing it to other groups. So down here, you can see the 3 cities: Santo Domingo, Las Galeras, San Juan de la Maguana are the 3 cities that they got the samples from. It says our analysis has been focused on 182 males from 3 locations in the Dominican Republic: Santo Domingo, San Juan de la Maguana, and Las Galeras. So they got the most from San Juan at 76, 50 from Domingo, and 56 from Las Galeras. We selected these 3 locations because of the different population size and geographical location in the Dominican Republic. Santo Domingo, located on the Dominican southern coast, is the capital of the Dominican Republic, and it was the first Spanish colony in America. San Juan de la Maguana is one of the oldest cities of the Dominican Republic in the western part of the country. Finally, Las Galeras is a small village in the east coast of the Samana Peninsula. Blood or saliva samples have been collected on a voluntary basis more than 20 years ago after obtaining an appropriate informed consent and according to all ethical guidelines that affect. At that time, DNA extraction was performed in our lab at Sapienza, University of Rome. So I'm not going to read all this stuff because it's pretty much telling you how they extracted the DNA. And just for something that made me cringe, Vanilla Hebrew stated, "Oh, you mean to tell me you can tell me my ancestry by my spit?" Yes, you can, because every cell in your body carries a copy of your DNA. You learn this in middle school. You learn this early on. If you have a proper education, you should know that every cell, somatic or germ, meaning your sex cells and your somatic cells or your body cells that do everything else, right? They all carry a copy of your DNA. So all we need is your saliva, to analyze your Y chromosome, your mtDNA, so on and so forth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It talks about here the Y haplogroups that they got here. SDR analysis. We're going to go down to the introduction here. Some of the haplogroups here, the 13 main Y haplogroups in the 3 sampling locations. And as you can see, again, every haplogroup is telling you these is a different group of males these people descend from. So again, the issue is still here. They're too diverse to all be called one person or one group descending from this man named Simeon that existed 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. And also, I want to say this to you, Black Hebrew Israelites. This is the evidence that's against you. This is the evidence that's against you. The Jews over there, you're trying to demarcate them and tell them who they are not and claim that they're European and claim all these other things to try to, demarcate them and castigate them as a people. Meanwhile, they have pertinent markers that go back to the Levant during the time and before the time of the formulation of the Israelite populace. This is what you have to deal with. Look at all these different groups. You have haplogroup B, which is a Paleo-African group that are known for being Central African foragers. The EM33, E1A, which are known to be in the Dogon and other West and Central African groups. E1B1A, M2, if you guys follow this channel, you know that. That's the Central African group. E1B1B, M215, E1B1B is found in West Central Africa, North Africa, and East Africa. EM75 is found in West and East Africa. These are all different male groups. GM201, that's Central European. Haplogroup I, Central and Eastern European. J2M172, now that's Anatolian, Greek, some Middle Eastern, Caucasian. When I say Caucasian, I'm talking about the general Caucasus, Trans-Caucasus region. I'm not talking about how we use the term today. I'm talking about geographically. R1A, same thing. That's Eastern European. R1B, that's Western European today. TM70, that's North. It's some lineages in Europe. Some of that is going to the ancient Near East, East Africa, and the Middle East, and the Levant. You also have QM2, which is primarily, let me get this straight for everybody that's watching. QM2, anytime you see QM2, that is a Pan-American haplogroup. Most, if not all, because we got the C markers too, but majority of ancient males found and dug up from the ground in the Americas descend from the Q haplogroup. This is a totally different group. All of these groups are different. So how do you melt and mesh all these groups into Simeon? It does not make any sense. All of these groups are diverse. Look at that diversity. That's 1, 2, 3, 13 different groups. And you guys are trying to mesh and compress 13 groups into one man that lived in the Middle Bronze Age. Just think about that for a minute. Think about how insane that is. This is insane. Okay? Anyway, let me go now. It says here the 3 Dominican locations do not show significant differences in their Y haplogroup composition as a whole. So then we analyze a single group hereafter. Considering the worldwide geographic distribution of the Y haplogroups observed in our Dominican samples, we were able to recognize three different ancestries of the paternal lineages: Sub-Saharan African, the four haplogroups of BM60, E1A, E1B1A, M2, and E2M75. Northern African or European has six haplogroups: is GM2, IM170, J1M267, J2M172, and these two probably coming from Jewish migrants. These are probably Jewish migrants here, and R1A, R1B, M269. And Native American ancestry, one haplogroup QM242. Again, that is the Pan American haplogroup. Two of the main lineages, E1B1B, M215, and TM70 cannot be assigned at this level of resolution since they are common in both the Mediterranean and the sub-Saharan region. Because of its history and the geographic barrier represented by the Sahara Desert, Northern Africa is genetically more similar to Southern Europe and Near East than to Sub-Saharan Africa. And for the aim of this study, it will be considered as Northern African European region. The distribution of the main Y lineages in the Dominican Republic and the other Greater Antilles Islands are summarized in Figure 2. And that's what you see here. And as you can see, Jamaica has a large African component, mainly E1B1A. Haiti also has a very large African component, E1B1A. This is why it's weird to say that Simeon and Levi, as they say, Levi being Haiti and Simeon being Dominican Republic, being brothers, when as we can see, they have a completely different paternal arrangement here. You see the African component, you see different European components here. You see small traces of the haplogroup Q, which is the indigenous ancient Native American component that we see amongst them. And again, the Europeans, less than 70% of all of these lineages. So just think about it, because we're going to deal with the separate claims and separate videos. We're going to deal with Cuba, we're going to deal with Jamaica, we're going to deal with Puerto Rico, we're going to deal with Brazil, we're going to deal with the Colombian and Central American claims. We're going to deal with Mexico, and as you're going to see, is the theme, the repeated theme is going to be they have high European input. African Americans have high European input. Hondurans, and we can just keep going all day. Well, Hondurans are a little different. They have high African input, about 80%. Yeah, you guys are going to see. I meticulously went and got the up-to-date papers, paid for some papers on Wiley. So you guys are going to get fresh information on this once we get to a 12-part series coming soon, refuting each tribal claim, each 12-tribe chart claim that these groups, IUIC, Sakari, and so on and so forth, ISUPK, Captain Zaryak, and all these guys claim. We're going to go through each one and just break this down. It's long overdue. I've been wanting to do this. But right now, y'all getting that work on the DR. Again, look at all these haplogroups. Look at this. These are all different male groups. All of them. And all y'all gonna say is, I don't believe in DNA. Well, DNA is not something you believe in. It is. It just exists. These are signatures in your chromosomes. You can't get around that. Anyway. Y haplogroup distribution of main haplogroups in Greater Antilles. As a matter of fact, let me give y'all this paper. I like to share the actual paper. You can read it on your own. Yashub, you being disingenuous. You ain't representing that paper. Read it yourself. All right. Y haplogroup distribution of main haplogroups in the Greater Antilles. The larger pies represent the three Dominican populations here. Analyze data from the literature. Smaller pies for the Dominican Republic and the other islands of the Greater Antilles are also shown. The Cuban samples are from classified as R1N173 have not been tested for M269 and have been represented with a striped field. The group others include all the samples with the ancestral state at the markers here reported and whose ancestry is unknown. Chromosomes from the literature have been assigned North African European ancestry based on the reported ancestry in the publication and or geographic distribution of the derived downstream markers when available. These haplogroups have been assigned to North African European ancestry in our Dominican samples based on successful analysis. It says here, among the four sub-Saharan African main lineages, the most common is E1B1AM2 that alone reaches frequencies between 22 and 39% in the three Dominican groups here analyzed. The remaining Dominican samples mostly belong to 6 European lineages. Again, this is the lion's share, mostly European, and then the second highest member is the E1B1A or West African and Central African component, as we can see here later. You know, this is a mixed bag. These people are not homogenous. They are not all the same. Okay. Let's keep going. It says here the Native American component is represented by the QM242 haplogroup. Again, for people that are just coming in, a haplogroup is a group of individuals that share a common ancestor. We're dealing with Y DNA here, so this is sharing a common male ancestor. What is the central theme of the 12 tribe chart? That everybody on that list descends from a man. A man, that means he has a Y DNA. He has a ball sack, so he has sperm, right? He had sex and he reproduced. And they're claiming that all these groups are his male descendants. I don't know how that's possible with 13 different haplogroups, meaning these people come from 13 different male lineages, all separate and unique from each other. It says the Native American component is represented by the QM242 haplogroup that was rarely observed. The highest frequency was 7%. These observations are in line with previous findings from other Caribbean islands and Central and Southern American populations. Major Y haplogroups. The further shed light on the continental origin of E1B1B, M215, and TM70 chromosomes to determine the exact place of origin of the 13 main haplogroups found in our Dominican samples. Again, 13 main haplogroups, 13 different male lineages, distinct and unique from each other. There's no way they all can be Simeon. That doesn't make any sense. There are 13 main haplogroups having different geographical distributions, different origins, different languages, different every damn thing. All right. It says we analyzed a set of 53 additional informative markers selected on the basis of their phylogenetic position and focusing on those able to discriminate among different African origins. E1B1B M215 haplogroup is a common lineage spread across 3 continents, Africa, Asia, and Europe. We analyzed 18 additional Y SNPs to unambiguously infer the ancestry to our 7 Dominican E1B1B M215 chromosomes. One individual belongs to the Mediterranean E1B1B M34. 2 samples show the derived state at the V2009 variant downstream to the V68 SNP and parallel to the E1B1B M78 clade. E1B1B V2009 is quite rare, observed in southern Italy, Sardinia, northern Africa, and among the Fulbe people, and it probably originated in Europe, suggesting a Mediterranean ancestry of E1B1B V2009 Dominican chromosomes. To address this issue, so we're seeing again, they have this different geographical diverse ancestry here. We got people that could possibly be from Sardinia, Southern Europe, could possibly be a part of the Fula or the Fulani, possibly a part of North Africa, another North African group, the Berbers. This is what you dive into when we're dealing with ancestry. We are hodgepodges. We are not homogenous units. That's why I said a lot of these ideas of Black Hebrew Israelites and Afrocentrics, they're just extensions of old scientific racism, believing that if you're fitting into these racial boxes or these ethno-linguistic boxes, then you must all have common descent. That's not how it works. As we're seeing with the data collected from the DNA of the people living there today that you guys are claiming are a descendant of each son of Jacob. It says here, suggesting the Mediterranean ancestry. To address this issue, we produced YSDR profiles of these individuals and reconstructed their relation with published samples from Sardinia, Northern Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa using UPGMA approach, which confirmed the Northern African European ancestry in our Dominican individuals. Within the E1B1B M215, one additional sample shows the derived allele at the marker BY1311 internal to the Mediterranean E1B1B M78 B3536 subclade. The last 3 chromosomes belong to the Northern African E1B1B M81 group. Haplogroup TM70 is observed at low frequencies in Europe, Africa, and Near East, where it probably originated. The YSDR analysis of these chromosomes allowed us to classify them in a Northern African European group since they form a cluster with North African individuals. After the molecular dissection, all our E1B1B and TM70 samples were unambiguously assigned to a Northern African European ancestry. Regarding the sublineages, we selected and analyzed 5 additional markers, dividing the lineages of BM60. This is the haplogroup of Chris Rock, if you know the comedian. Again, BM60 are usually related to foragers from Western Central Africa, hunter-gatherer groups, right? Like the Pygmies, the Baka. All B chromosomes on Dominican samples belong to B2BM109 subclade. This is mainly observed in Central Africa. It is very rare in Western Africa. E1B1AM2 Dominican subjects belong to 15 different internal lineages. The most frequent E1B1AM2 subclades is E1B1A U174, which is observed at a frequency as high as 21% in our Dominican sample. This clade is common in Central Africa and its frequency observed in Eastern Africa and Southern Africa, whereas it is quite rare in Western Africa. Its geographic distribution reflects the Bantu expansion to which this lineage has been associated. The other E1B1AM2 lineages are not frequently observed among our Dominican groups, including E1B1AM2Z15939 clade, which is found at high frequencies, 30 to 50% among Western Africans and Fubi people. We analyzed 2 SNPs internal to the E1AM33 clade, namely Z932 and M44. We found no individuals belonging to the E1AM44 subclade, which is often observed among the Fulbe people. Our Dominican samples were found to be E1M33 or E1AZ932, with the former rarely observed and the latter commonly found in both Central and Western Africa. Regarding the E2M75 lineage, we analyzed 2 internal clades defined by M41 and M85. Both Dominican samples show the ancestral allele at these markers belong to the paragroup E2M75, which has been observed in both Western and Central Africa. In total, we observed about 59% of Dominican samples with North African European ancestry, 11 different haplogroups, about 38% of Sub-Saharan Africans ancestry, 19 haplogroups, and less than 3% of Native American ancestry, a single haplogroup. Again, none of this comports with the idea of a 12 tribes chart. None of this comports with the idea of all these groups descending from one man named Jacob that lived in the Middle Bronze, that lived in the Levantine region. None of this supports that. They're too mixed up. There's too many groups here. Too many different groups. Can you hit that fan for me? Thank you. Ancestry inferences for the African component of the Dominican Y-chromosome diversity. Taking into account the haplogroup distribution of Sub-Saharan lineages, we tried to assign a specific Sub-Saharan region for our Dominican samples based on their haplogroup affiliation. To this aim, we subdivided the Sub-Saharan Africa in 4 macro regions: Western, Central Africa, Eastern Africa, and Southern Africa. Our aim was to analyze how the transatlantic slave trade shaped the composition of the putatively Sub-Saharan Y clades. For this reason, we focus only on the Western African, Central African macro regions, which have been the main source area of African slaves, ignoring the lineages with a different Sub-Saharan origin. And I also want to make this quick, because we got all these pseudo groups out here spreading misinformation and disinformation. You have a group claiming the slave trade never happened and that these people are all indigenous Indians. That doesn't make any sense either, because as we can see, our Y chromosomes on this side of Earth match the Y chromosomes in Western Central Africa. So how do you explain that if you're trying to do away with or explain away the transatlantic slave trade? It says here, our sample collection includes also nomadic populations, namely Fulbe, Tuareg, and Bantu. The former occupies a wide area of the Sahelian belt stretching from Senegal to Sudan. Although their origins are still a matter of debate, the first records of their presence placed them in Western Africa, so they have been considered of Western African origin. Tuareg are Sahelian nomadic people. However, their North African origin is well known. So they can be grouped with North Africans, and we did not include them in this analysis. Bantu people are widespread in Sub-Saharan Africa as a consequence of the Bantu expansion that began no more than 5,000 years ago and has been linked with the spread of agriculture and iron technology. The Bantu's place of origin has been located in Central Africa between Cameroon and Nigeria, where their expansion started towards Eastern and Southern Africa. Taking into account the Bantu influx on the Sub-Saharan people, we classified the Y lineages related to Bantu expansions as Central African. To assign each Dominican sample to Western or Central Africa, we consider the distribution of their Y haplogroups in the African continent. Assigning a sample to one of the two areas of the frequency difference was at least an order of magnitude. Doubtful cases have been further dissected and analyzing their YSTR profiles with the UPGMA approach. This YSTR analysis allowed us to define as West African the E1A M33 individual, where it was not possible to unambiguously assign E1As to E932 and E2M75 individuals. Like I said earlier, those clades are found all over Africa. So you have E2 in East Africa and West Africa, and some parts of North Africa, and E1AC 932 as well. So they couldn't just pin that to West and Central Africa. It says here, using this frequency approach, we were able to assign 47 Dominican individuals, approximately 26% of our sample, to Central Africa, 14, approximately 7% to Western Africa, and only 8 individuals have not been assigned. And as you can see here, haplogroup B, Central Africa, again, makes sense. The Biaka, the Pygmies, we know that they frequent there. E1A, West M33, Western Africa. The Z932 clade, unknown. And again, why am I going through all these different groups if they're all the same? If they all should come together, aggregate and come together and form into one man known as Simeon that lived in the Middle Bronze Age that descends from Jacob. You would not see these different branches, these different haplogroups with their own distinct branches on the phylogenetic tree as we see here. 19 different Sub-Saharan African groups here that we're looking at. How do you do that? This does not make any sense scientifically. It does not make any sense when we look at things from an empirical standpoint instead of your biblical breakdown that you got from some guy that's speaking nonsense. Again, E1B1A CTS10066 is known to Western Africa. E1B1A M58, which is a very interesting branch. It's E1B1A1, which is also found in places like the Levant and Egypt. We do see that. That's why it says unknown there. M10, Central Africa. Again, this is going off its public. It's present distribution. M10 V2003. These are all E1B1A clades. You see several E1B1A clades. E1B1A spits out so many clades because it dealt with expansions. There's a lot of E1B1A clades here. So you see here U209, M415, Central Africa. Most of these are Central African. Western African here with the V7937. N191 Western African, N4313 is classified Central African, U174 Central African, Z15939 Western African, and again E2 being unknown because of its distribution. It says our data suggests a disproportion of Central African ancestry compared with Western Africa, the Western African one. 2 haplogroups were particularly informative about the sub-Saharan origin of our Dominican samples, namely E1B1A U174 and E1B1A Z15939. These 2 lineages show a clear differentiation between Central and Western Africa. E1B1A U174 is frequent in Central Africa, whereas it is much less common in Western Africa. Its distribution in the African continent has been linked to the Bantu expansion. The E1B1A Z15939 lineages show a different distribution, being mainly observed in Western Africa, whereas in Central Africa, it is virtually observed only among the Fulbe people. In both cases, our Dominican samples show frequencies similar to Central Africa for these 2 clades, further suggesting a predominant Central African ancestry. To quantify the relative contribution of the 2 sub-Saharan regions in the Dominican people, we estimated its admixture considering the frequency of the Dominican Y clades, also observed in Central and Western Africa. The admixture analysis for the 2 sub-Saharan regions resulted in 83% plus or minus 0.1% Central African contribution and a 17% plus or minus 0.1% contribution of West African with respect to African haplogroups in our Dominican sample. These values approximately correspond to a 32% Central African contribution and a 6% Western African contribution after taking into account that sub-Saharan African component in our Dominican sample is about 38%. However, our results should be interpreted with the due caution due to the difference in sample size and the extent of sampling areas between our Western African and Central African groups. So mainly, it's saying that most of the slaves or most of the African ancestry that we see in the DR is coming from Central Africa. Majority of it is Central Africa, which you have to beat in a lot of these guys' head that not only we're diverse in lineage, we're diverse in geographical distribution. All right, these have to be beating your head because a lot of these people are pseudo, whether they're Afrocentric or Black Hebrew Israelite. They teach through the lens of race. They teach through the idea that if you fit in a racial category or an ethno-linguistic group, then you all must come from the same place, all must descend from the same people. That is the issue here. That is the issue. Okay, so let's keep going. We're almost finished. The discussion. The African ancestry of the Dominican Y lineages. The transatlantic slave trade started by the Spanish colonists in the 15th century and lasted until the 19th century, led by the deportation in America of about 10 million Africans to exploit it in the European colonies. It has been estimated from available archival records that approximately 5 million slaves were deported in the Caribbean region, with approximately 1 million only in Hispaniola Island. The transatlantic slave trade database, the large majority of the African slaves were embarked in harbors along the western central Atlantic coast from Senegal to Angola. However, little is known about the exact place of origin of the captives. Usually, the transatlantic slave trade is divided into two main phases. The first one started just after the European colonization and involved mainly Western African people from Senegambia, accounting for less than 20% of all deported slaves. The second peaked in the 18th century and accounted for the large majority of the trade, deporting people from the Bight of Benin and Biafra. Our data from the Y-chromosome are in line with this scenario, observing a minority of Western African lineages in Dominican sample, whereas most of their Y clades seem to come from Central Africa. Interestingly, our results are also in line with data from mtDNA and from genome-wide studies that showed a larger amount of haplotypes of putative Central African origin in the Caribbean population. These findings suggest that both enslaved women and men in the Caribbean mainly come from the same African regions, as we see a large Central African component here in the Dominicans. Well, again, I'm still having the issue here. We're still seeing that the 12 tribe chart does not work. Does not work because we have these different, not only are you getting these people from Africa, these people are diverse within Africa with different haplogroups, as we saw E2, E1A, E1B1A, E1B1B as well, right? And haplogroup B, which is a Paleo-African group. Those are separate groups, 19 different haplogroups. That's 19 separate male lineages. They all can't converge and go back to a man named Simeon that lived in the Middle Bronze. It just doesn't make any sense. There is no homogeneity here. In order for the 12 tribes chart to work, there has to be homogeneity, which we do not see. We do not see all these men that we call Dominicans today sharing one Y haplogroup. We don't see that. All right. It says here, the exact place of origin within the broad Central African region is not easy to state, and our resolution level does not allow us to resolve this. However, some clues point to an origin from the coastal regions rather than the Sahelian area. Considering the Y haplogroup composition in our Dominican sample, we can note that the clades frequently observed in the Sahel are usually rare or absent. A good example is represented by some lineages internal to the E1B1A M2 haplogroup, such as E1B1A M10 and E1B1A V5280, which are observed mainly in the Sahelian groups. Although the E1B1A M2 is the most frequent African haplogroup in the Dominican Republic and in the whole Caribbean archipelago, these lineages are absent or very rare. A stronger clue is represented by the American distribution of the R1B V88 haplogroup, which is very frequent in the Lake Chad Basin and sharply decreases moving west and south. This haplogroup has not been observed in our Dominican sample and has been rarely reported from other Caribbean locations, in line with a coastal origin of slaves rather than Sahelian. However, it is worth noting that this lineage was observed in an African slave dating back to the 17th century from the Caribbean island of St. Martin, suggesting that slaves could come from other regions of the African continent, albeit at a lesser extent compared with Western and Central Africa. which also blows a hole in another idea that everybody that comes off a slave ship is the same. Everybody, because Deuteronomy 28, we all the same. Deuteronomy 28:68 says that, these people came out of slave ships. They all Israelites. Doesn't make any sense. We got different lineages, different groups of males, different groups of females getting on these slave ships. They don't even all share the same male or female ancestors. So all we're doing is blowing holes in this thing. They all can't go back to Simeon. They got different male lineages. Your curses don't work. You guys want to use curses to substitute genetic lineages. Your curses do not work. That goes back to the shared experience thing. You believe shared experience denotes shared ancestry, which we're showing it doesn't, because even R1BVA8 was a victim of the slave trade. It's a completely different male lineage that ultimately derives from the Balkans and Europe. Sex bias admixture in the Dominican Republic, the collapse of the native populations and massive deportation of Africans heavily shaped the genetic features of the American people with different degree of admixture in different areas, depending on both the population size and social factors. Among the Iberian colonists, there was a marked predominance of males, leading to an early admixture between Iberian men and native women. This is why we see a 59% introgression of European and North African lineages, because a lot of these Iberian men would come down here and sleep with the native women. So a lot of these people that you're calling and claiming are the children of Simeon are the children of European men. And if they are Simeon, then the West Europeans that you love to condemn, the people that you love to say that are going in chains, that you love to say that are going to be destroyed, prepare slaughter for their children. Well, guess what? These people are their children, and you may be one of their sons. That's the irony and poetic justice of this. Because again, the introgression from Europeans is high amongst all of the groups that we find on the 12 tribes chart. So while you're wishing death on entire groups, you might include yourself in that group because you may, like Gorilla Hebrew, be a son of that group. It says here, the interethnic admixture has continued to be common over time in the Iberian colonies because of the legislation and patriarchal structure of the society. Although Europeans were at the top of the society and interethnic marriage was illegal, exceptions were allowed. For example, change of ethnicity affiliation. And there were no consequences for European men for having children with Native or African women with a high rate of illegitimacy. Other elements of social fluidity were the fact that, according to the Iberian legislation, Native Americans were not officially slaves. African slaves could be freed under some circumstances, and mixed individuals were recognized with a distinct status. All these aspects led to a higher level admixture in the Iberian colonies compared with the British ones, where the slavery legislation and rules against interethnic relations were stricter and the social barriers were stronger. Sex bias admixture is clearly shown by the differences between the Y and mtDNA haplogroup composition, with a relatively high proportion of Native Americans and African maternal lineages, compared with the paternal lineages, which show a high frequency of European haplogroups. In this context, the Dominican Republic is in line with the observations from other Caribbean and non-Caribbean American regions. All the mtDNA African lineages account for 61% of the maternal haplogroups, with the most frequent mtDNA lineages being the sub-Saharan L1C, L2A, L3B, and L3D. All reaching frequencies higher than 10%. The native lineages are present at the frequency of 22%, slightly more than European maternal clades at 19%. From a Y haplogroup perspective, the European lineages represent the majority of haplogroups, followed by the African clades, and with a very rare presence of native clades. This genetic pattern reflects the society organization of the Iberian colonies, which the Dominican Republic was part of, characterized by a high degree of interethnic relationships between European men and Native American or African women. And that is going to be the story when we go over all of the groups that are listed on the 12 tribes chart. High European male introgression. A lot of these people are descendants of European males. There's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is, it's something wrong with y'all because y'all are out there wishing death on your cousins, on your brothers and your sisters, your aunts and your uncles. That's what you're doing. Because many of y'all that subscribe to this 12 tribe chart fall in one of these brackets, which are very diverse and very well could be a descendant of these European people that you don't like so damn much. Comparison between the Dominican Republic and Haiti and other Antilles. Extending the analysis to the whole Antilles archipelago, the overall Y haplogroup pattern shows European and African lineages at high frequencies with a rare or absent native lineage. Again, the native lineages don't exist. So how does, they're very rare. So how does your Arthur theory work? How does your Arthur hypothesis? How does that work if many of the native lineages in these places are eviscerated and brought to very, very, very low numbers, not even represented? It says the relative frequencies of European African clades seem to be correlated with the type of colonial rule. In the British and French colonies, the segregation of slaves was stronger than in the Iberian territories. The inter-ethnic marriages prohibited and no rights were recognized to the children of parents of different ethnicities. Therefore, in former British and French territories, the separation between the two main groups, i.e. European colonists and African slaves, was sharper and the admixture reduced. For this reason, the European Y lineages are usually less frequent than the African ones, partly reflecting the higher number of African slaves compared with the European rulers in the colonies. That's why Jamaica is, the way it is, has high African paternal there. It says an example is represented by the Jamaican island and the Greater Antilles under the British rule since 1655 and characterized by a higher proportion of white African lineages compared with the European ones. Another example is represented by Haiti, which shared the Hispaniola Island with the Dominican Republic, although the two countries have experienced different colonial rules and different histories. Differently from the Dominican Republic, Haiti passed under the French rule in 1697, although the French law recognized the status of the admixed people, defined colors from the French gens de couleur, and some rights were allowed to them. The slavery conditions were particularly harsh and brutal, with a high death rate of the African slaves and continuously new deportation from Africa. Because of the harsh conditions of the slaves, and on the wave of the French Revolution, a slave rebellion broke out in the colony that eventually ended with the independence of Haiti and a massacre of most of the white population. This is reflected by the mtDNA and Y haplogroup composition of Haitians. Considering the mtDNA haplogroup composition, no Native American lineages are reported, and the European clades are rare, less than 2%, whereas more than 98% of the population show an African haplogroup. So they went through a bottleneck. When the Haitian Revolution created a bottleneck on that island. It says here the Y haplogroup composition differs from the other American areas. The African lineages account for 70% of the Y lineages, with the sub-Saharan African E1, B1A, M2 reaching a frequency higher than 60%, whereas the European paternal lineages are less common compared with the former colonies at 25%, and no native clades have been reported. In the Dominican part of the island, the haplogroup composition dramatically changes with a higher proportion of European Y lineages and African mtDNA clades. All right, and they give you the breakdown here, island to island. And again, you can see that the Y-DNA of Africans on the Dominican side is much less on the Dominican side than it is on the Haitian side, which almost 75%. You still see the European and a little bit of Native American ancestry paternally. And as you can see, majority of the mitochondrial DNA of sub-Saharan African, of the Haitians is sub-Saharan African, and very little European input, and no Native American maternal DNA. So not that many Native American, or if any, Native American females, very few, if any, are rare European ancestry on the female side. But 25% of the males still retain it. Y'all can't get away from that European introgression, man. That is a part of your ancestry. There's nothing you can do about it. The difference in the social organization between Iberian and British colonies is reflected also by the genome-wide analysis. It is also mirrored by the perceived ancestry characterized by high proportion of mixed ancestry and lower proportions of European, Native American, and African ancestors in former Iberian colonies from Central and Southern America. However, in former British or French colonies, the African ancestry is usually the most reported. Interestingly, the Dominican Republic is the only Antillean region with a high proportion of perceived mixed ancestry, similar to the values reported in the former Iberian colonies from the continent and differently from the other Antilles previously under British, French, and Dutch rule. Despite the differences in their relative proportion, the Y lineages observed in the Antilles and in the former colonial territories in general are mainly the same. In particular, the presence of the same sub-Saharan Y haplogroups seem to suggest that the transatlantic slavery routes and slave source regions were largely the same for most of the American colonies. Conclusions. Our analysis of the Y chromosome diversity of the Dominican Republic allow us to shed light on the colonial history of this country and of the greater Antilles in general. First, our results suggest that most of the African slaves came from Central Africa rather than Western Africa, with minor inputs from other regions. Although our level of resolution does not allow an analysis of the geographic origins of slaves at a finer scale, the absence of or paucity in the Dominican Republic of Y haplogroups frequent in the internal regions of Central Africa points to the coastal regions as a main slave source area. Second, we observed an excess of European paternal lineages in native or African maternal clades due to a sex-biased admixture in line with the predominant role of European males in the colonial society. Third, the frequency of European or African paternal lineages varies in the Antilles and seems to be correlated with the type of colonial rule. The Iberian legislation was less strict as regards to inter-ethnic unions, leading to higher levels of admixture and higher frequencies of European Y haplogroups compared with colonies formerly under the British or French and Dutch rule. And that's the motherfucking deal. So at the end of the day, the paper's clear, the data is clear. The Dominicans are a diverse group, over 13 different haplogroups, 13 different male lineages. They're mixed with different Europeans, different Africans, and some small Native American input. The Arthur story just does not work. It does not even fit because, again, with Simeon, you're claiming that most of these people be indigenous, Native, Indian. No, they're not. So that doesn't make sense. That withers around the edge. As we can see, a lot of European admixture here. Majority of it is European, so they all can't be the same. And they're a part of this group that you guys hate and you spew so much venom on the internet for. The Europeans. You guys are of the European matrix. If you're African American, there's a high chance, especially if you live in the North, that you're of the European matrix. You are a son of a European. A lot of you guys want to escape your Y DNA. You can't escape your Y DNA. You can't. That's just what it is. That's what it is. So with that, let me read some comments because I want to read and get through that. Did not want this to linger on and be a longer show than it needs to be. I want this to be digestible. I want people to learn at the end of the day. Those that are willing to learn, right? As Paul said in the scriptures, for all you Bible believers out there, you following the Jewish tradition, you following the people that actually come from those areas, right? That can validate those claims. You follow and they work, right? In the book, it says, if any man be ignorant, let him be. That is the greatest advice that I could give. I used to have thousands of viewers, right? And you can't say, oh, it's because I'm crass. I've been crass. No, I was crass back then. The reason why I had thousands of viewers, because the doctrine that I was teaching conformed to Black Hebrew Israelites. It conformed to IUIC, right, which is gaining popularity at that time. I dropped those arguments. The views dropped with it. It had nothing to do with crass or how I speak to y'all. You know, you guys are pseudo. And I don't want friends. I don't want to be friends with Afrocentrics. You're just as pseudo as Black Hebrew Israelites. You're just as racist as Black Hebrew Israelites. Right? That's why we got to meticulously go through all of these doctrines and just disarm them. Right? And the best way to disarm them, how you combat bad information, is with good information. So with that being said, let's read some things. Let's see what y'all got to say here. Let's see if I stirred the pot. Let me see. Awaken says, Shalom, 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 Red, Rel Ruga. Student Yahweh says, Simeon, Yes, Simeon. They claim that the Simeon, the tribe of Simeon, are the Dominicans. JG says Dominicans, like Puerto Ricans, come from Spanish men or African men. Yes, yes. Awaken Now disagrees. That's so untrue. Wow. Just like people in Israel are not allowed to take DNA tests because they all know they come from Europe. No, that's not why they don't allow direct to consumer DNA tests in Israel. That's another video that we're going to do here on the channel, dispelling that. They don't allow direct to the consumer, and it's because of personal, security risks with the people there. Shalom, Sean. He said, Ruddy Bruce says, y'all gonna keep letting these people tell y'all you ain't nothing but a slave. I don't get that comment. Who's letting people know that you ain't nothing but a slave? JG says Puerto Ricans come from Spanish man. I'd be laughing when they start saying Taino. I wouldn't laugh, but maybe on the female side, it's more likely that their mothers descend from Tainos than they do in the male side. D-Red says, what it do? D-Red says the women have a high native lineage. Yes. Ruddy Brew says that's the issue. Hebrews were not Levantine. I don't get that as well. Ruddy Brew said, apologize. I didn't speak when I first came in. Whatever. Shalom, brother. Yaz Botanical says, shalom. He said, I love Dominican women. Are any of these haplogroups considered Semitic? Yeah, some people consider some of those haplogroups Semitic. E1B, 1B, and J1 and J2. Some J2 clades. Saying you don't exactly, Naphtali, saying you don't believe in DNA is like saying you don't believe in yourself. Exactly, because that's what DNA is, the information that creates you. It is the genetic code that creates who you are, physical embodiment of you. Again, I did share the paper with you guys. Phil 831 said, who are the real tribes? It is impossible to connect to men that lived 3,700 years ago directly to them, to a small group of men. That is impossible unless you have a time machine, go back there and swap them, the DNA, and then track all their sons. That's literally impossible. Real Ruger says the real 12 tribes and who are the Israelites is technically two different discussions. Yes, it is, because Israelites are a hodgepodge of people. They're not just the sons of Jacob, as many people try to conflate. D-Red says, now they're saying the North American Aboriginal Americans colonized the Eastern world. Yeah, just more and more pseudo-confabulation there. Abu says, forget the popcorn. I'm making a plate of mango to have while listening to this. Yap indeed. Yap indeed. Yeah. Jay Stray says, sounds like you're misrepresenting their position when stating that each individual person must be an Israelite. Why not introduce nuance into your arguments to make the refutation more accurate? I'm not misinterpreting their position. I read from their website what they mean. I literally read right here. It says here, the tribe of Simeon was among the 10 tribes of Israel when they migrated to Arsareth. The Americas, according to 2nd Ezra 13:40 to 44. They inhabited the island of Hispaniola, which we shall prove and were conquered by Spain in 1492. That is the words from their website. I literally read that before I started. Jay Stray also says, also the curses are what is said by God. They may have the interpretation wrong, but saying that the curses don't work is blasphemy when God himself said they will be a sign. It is blasphemy. I guess it is blasphemy because y'all using that as a damn DNA test. That's the blasphemous part of that, right? Just because you got on a damn slave ship and you think that means you fit Deuteronomy 28:68 does not mean that you're an Israelite. Second Exodus says, I wonder when someone's going to tell Teo that haplogroup G is closely related to haplogroup J. We got a video coming about of Teo. They recently used haplogroups to demarcate Native Indians. Second Exodus says Arsareth is in North Africa, not America. Interesting. D-Red said they say your Y DNA don't matter. It's your autosomal that matters. Your autosomal don't tell you nothing. That's what Afrocentric be, try to trap you on. Autosomal DNA does not tell you direct lineage. You can have a high African autosomal and be paternally and maternally European or some other group. Orthodox Moore says that second Exodus, Avery did that over 3 years ago. We've been told them G and J descends from the same pair group. Yeah. GH.JK. Second Exodus says, yeah, I realize that they are talking about DNA again. Moore says we have scholastic bullets in the clip for their new stance, now that they accept haplogroup science. All right, anybody else have any more questions about what was brought out today? Any comments? Jay Strait claims that I'm misrepresenting their position. I don't know how I was a part of this group. I taught the damn 12 tribes chart. I did all the breakdowns. I even tried to expound on it. So I am very familiar with this topic. Very, very familiar. What's happening is you don't like the information that's being brought forth because the information does not conform at all with anything ISUBK, General Yohana, Nathaniel, and all the rest of the talking heads of those organizations believe in. It doesn't conform at all. It does not paint the picture that would be harmonious with the idea that these people are the 12 tribes or the sons of the 12 tribes of Israel directly. It just does not paint that narrative. And they literally believe that they are the sons of the 12 tribes. That's literally what they teach. I know. I was a part of the organization for years. I went on the street corners, passed out flyers, told random people, asked random people where they from. Where are you from? Mexico? Oh, you the tribe of Issachar. So you can't tell me. You like it's like that saying say you can't talk slick to a can of oil. You understand? It just does not work. There was no nuance. We just seen people that were Latino, or we seen people that were perceived as black, and we assume, oh, you black, you Judah. That was it. How is that nuance? Oh, use some nuance. That's not nuance. Yeah, well, they can say saying and doing is two different things. I've heard multiple saying they know all people on the charts. They don't know. And that's the problem. They're misleading people, like most of these damn groups. They're misleading people, and they don't want to accept any up-to-date information because they want to keep this old, crude methodology that they got from some guy living in the 60s. Excuse me. Moore says they don't even believe in their own 12 tribes chart. Hence, IUIC and Sakari remixing it to expand their audience. And this is why I say, if anybody want to talk ancestry or want to demarcate someone else's ancestry, do me the favor first. Do me the favor and you go take your DNA test before you go tell a large swath of people they don't belong somewhere. You go take your DNA test first, and we'll do a show here on the channel, analyze your DNA and see where your origins go back to, or what ancient burials you tie yourself to, right? Especially Sakari and everybody. Again, poetic justice. Sakari found out he was R1V and 269. Found he was a descendant of R1V. That's Western European. Majority of your content on YouTube is either anti-Semitic or racist. Oh, I forgot. Oh, he can't be racist. He's a minority. Racism means that you have to have a power structure. That's idiocy. So I guess I can't be a sexist because I don't have a power structure. I can be as evil as I want to the other gender because I don't have a power structure. All these excuses to be horrible people. Y'all make all these excuses to behave badly. Y'all make every excuse in the world. As long as you're a minority, you can do whatever the hell you want to. That's how you guys think. I'm not making a claim on what video. What part of this video did I make a claim about Shemitic? Somebody asked about which groups are Semitic, And in academic literature, the Semitic groups will be J1, J2, and E1, B1B, people that speak Semitic languages. Right? You know what I'm saying? And like I said earlier, this is why nobody wants to debate. Everybody just run their mouth. They don't want to have the debate because they make these claims. These definitive claims, by the way. Again, that's why we'll go to random people on the street and tell them, hey, you Jamaican, you from the tribe of Benjamin. You understand? That's why we would do that. We taught that. Come on, man. Stop it. You know that's not going to work with us, man. Your ass going to be hibachi within the first slide. As we presented today, the Dominicans are a hodgepodge. They are a mixed bag. Over 13 haplogroups. That's 13 paternal haplogroups, 13 paternal lines. They all can't go back to Simeon. Second Exodus says, my haplogroup from family tree DNA is EFTAF, 5825. I forget what mine is, but I did take the big Y up to 700 SNPs. And my most recent common ancestor, it was tracked to 300 BC, estimated 300 BCE. And I'm a downstream of EU290, which is a downstream of U175. Yeah, Japanese bar and grill all day. Exactly, second Exodus. Haplogroup J and Levantine. It's Levantine. Jay Strait said, I remember hearing your model being heavy on Yap. Yeah, but the channel has been centered around Yap. What about it? That does not automatically disavow haplogroup J and their involvement in the spread and dissemination of Semitic languages. Now, if you ask me who I believe is a descendant of a man named Shem, I think possibly DE. I've been said that. That's my theory. But somehow you think that disavows them. It doesn't. Anyway, any more comments before we get out of here? Well, that's good, man. I'm glad you're learning. You went through Ivry's videos. I advise you to, watch Ivry before you watch one of these 12 tribe charters. I advise you to do that, man. But hopefully you did learn something. I hope you brothers and sisters learned something tonight, that the 12 tribe chart is implausible. Again, this is a refutation. This is not, you guys love to use the word debunk. This is refuting the 12 tribe chart. There's no way in hell the 12 tribe chart could be deemed as reality when we see the ancestry doesn't line up. They don't all merge and conform to one single line pointing to a man living in the Middle Bronze Age period. Well, that's fine, brother. I invite all the questions. It's okay, man. It's just that there's a certain vigor that I got to have towards certain groups because of how pervasive Black Hebrew Israelite Afrocentric ideology is. It pretty much runs the day. It pretty much runs the day, man. And we have the nerve to try to, cry racism when we support and nurture racism. We support and nurture racism. We donate to it. If there were white groups like this at the same magnitude, you guys would be bitching, moaning, and crying about it. It is a hustle more. It is a hustle because you're maximizing the amount of members that you can have. Like, it's a reason why Spanish music or Latino music or Latina music does so well in the Western Hemisphere. 19 other countries speak Spanish. 19 other countries speak Spanish. So you include them, you're including 19 different countries. So it is a good cash grab. It is what it is. But we here to teach. We here to present a clean glass of water. And like I said earlier, if any man be ignorant, let him be, man. Just got to go Pauline on that all day. We're not worried about those that could care less. We worry about those that are willing to learn or people that are open-minded. to come out of those coats. You understand? You know, these people call these places schools, and you guys are failing basic geographics. You know, basic geography, basic geology, stuff like that. It's basic things y'all missing. And y'all trying to teach who's who and demarcate whole swaths of groups because you don't like them. They the wrong skin color. I heard Tazariak say the North Africans, they don't even belong there. They're the white Arabs. The North Africans are indigenous. They're autochthonous to North Africa. The Amazi are autochthonous. They've been there for thousands and thousands of years. All right, man. I'm gonna let y'all. Any last questions? Just go ahead and post them. I'm getting ready to get out of here. And again, Simeon cannot be the Dominicans because Simeon is a man, putative man that lived in the Bronze Age. We have one chromosome. He is not a chimera. You know, he is not some kind of alien breed that Ron Dalton dreamed up or wrote up in his book. He can only pass one Y chromosome, a copy of his. You know. All right, we out of here, man. This 7 candlesticks up, and I've been telling you niggas, it ain't a debate. It's a stick up. Gang.